Good morning. How you doing? My name is Chris Warren. I serve Mayor Frank Jackson as Chief of Regional Development for the City of Cleveland. But my job today is really to be a welcomer to our friends from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for their visit to Cleveland this week, for this important announcement, and for their participation earlier today with many of the folks in Cleveland are dealing with abusive credit and financial practices in our community, and to participate tonight in a town hall meeting at our public library. Mayor Jackson, as I just left them from our cabinet meeting that is in session, asked me to convey 2 points, critical points. One is the Obama administration can count on the City of Cleveland as a reliable partner as you go forward with your important mission. And as we align our efforts to yours to rein in abusive practices that have hurt our city in ways that continue, as you say, to metastasize across our community. Tonight, our Director of Community Development, Daryl Rush, who Barbara Anderson works with at the city, will participate in laying out what some of our efforts are in Cleveland, including our support of very seasoned, aggressive, community-based organizations who have been dealing with the issues of payday lending, of predatory loans, of unfair credit card practices that we'll talk about this morning, and other issues. We call on the federal government at both the administrative level and the Congress to get on with this mission through the important work of your Bureau. So with that, let me move to introducing our 2 speakers this morning. First, I will bring to the podium Raj Date, who is the Special Advisor to the Secretary of Treasury for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He has a long and varied career around U.S. financial institutions as a strategy consultant, a bank executive, and as the Associate Director for Research, Markets, and Regulations at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. In 2009, Mr. Date founded and served as Chairman and Executive Director of the Cambridge Winter Center for Financial Institutions Policy. I'm very curious. I'll ask you later where the winter comes into that, but it must be that's the period of time, I don't know, Winter Center Financial Institutions Policy, a private nonprofit research and policy organization that supported reform of the U.S. financial system. We thank you, Raj, and the rest of your team for joining us here in Cleveland for an important series of announcements and meetings. Raj Date. Thank you very
much. Good morning. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you, Chris, for that kind introduction. I'm so glad to be in Cleveland, where later in the day, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau will meet with residents and local community leaders to talk about what the Bureau can be doing to help American consumers. But first, I'd like to announce an important initiative. As most of you know, the Bureau's mission is to help make consumer financial markets more transparent so that they work for consumers, for the responsible firms that serve them, and for the economy as a whole. Even before our official opening date, we launched a project to improve mortgage disclosures, and we call that project our Know Before You Owe project. In our first months, we expanded that project beyond mortgages to student loans. And today, I'm excited to announce another Know Before You Owe project, this time aimed at simplifying credit card agreements so that the prices and the terms are easier for consumers to understand. I bet most of us have at least one of these 3-inch pieces of plastic in our pockets right now. Credit cards represent about $700 billion in outstanding household debt. That's more than $6,000 per household. Now, a credit card is actually a pretty remarkable thing. It's a device that allows consumers to make purchases, which can be paid back immediately, or, if the consumer chooses, can be paid back over time. It's both a payment instrument and a way to access credit. Consumers spend trillions of dollars a year on their cards. A large percentage of that actually occurs at this time of year, around the holidays. People use them to buy everything, from a cup of coffee to a car. They're an everyday part of our lives. So credit cards can be useful, and they can be important, but they also come with risk, with different fees for different products and services. As a consumer, if you're going to take those risks, you should know what you are getting into. Now, make no mistake, the credit card market is clearly better for consumers than it used to be. The Card Act, which was signed into law more than 2 years ago, banned a range of practices that hid the real cost of having a credit card. Because of that legislation, there's less risk of having your interest rate on existing balance suddenly increase, and you're less likely to incur expensive late fees or other penalty charges. But while the Card Act did a lot of good, there's still a lot of progress to be made. Since the Bureau started taking credit card complaints and credit card inquiries 4 months ago, we've seen a real disconnect between how some consumers understand their credit card and how it actually works. This is true from the very start, when consumers sign up for a card. And that's why the CFPB has been looking at ways to simplify one source of confusion, the credit card contract itself. Like all financial products, credit cards come with rights and responsibilities, and to understand those rights and responsibilities, you need to understand the contract, which, unfortunately, most people in the real world don't have the time or the legal training to actually read and understand. Indeed, too many of us, routinely, without a second thought, accept that we don't understand the legal agreements that should matter in our lives. We skip over pages and pages of legal language and contract provisions. We just sign on the dotted line. We click, "I agree," without actually reading what we're agreeing to. Most consumers don't read their credit card agreements because they're too long, complicated, and written in dense, impenetrable legalese. They're written this way partly because credit cards are complicated. They're complicated products with lots of different prices and fees and features, and these agreements are written this way, sometimes because of the card issuer's desire to protect itself from litigation. The result is predictable. Consumers often complain about the terms relating to credit cards, terms that from a legal perspective they've agreed to by using the card after receiving the contract. According to a study by J.D. Power, 2/3 of cardholders feel that they don't completely understand the terms of their credit card account. Some companies have made real progress over the past several years in shortening their agreements, translating them into plain English, and redesigning them so they're easier to read. We support their efforts in doing this. We just think that there's more to be done. Some cardholder agreements take up too many pages, and some use language that is way too complicated. The bottom line is that many credit card agreements are confusing, and most consumers don't understand them. At the CFPB, we talk to people from all over the country about all kinds of financial products, not just credit cards. What we know from those conversations is that Americans want to be accountable for their decisions. They feel accountable for their decisions. Americans are typically grown-up, responsible people, but in order to be responsible, they do need to know what they're getting into in the first place. That's why we're launching our Know Before You Owe Simplified Credit Card Agreement. It's designed to help credit card issuers by providing a short, simple, straightforward credit card contract. The CFPB's prototype, Hot Starter, is short. While the average industry card agreement has almost 5,000 words, their prototype is roughly 1,100. Consumers difficult to understand terms. We've done this by taking out much of the legalese, the information that's contractually necessary but too dense for most consumers. And we've moved that language into standard definitions. These definitions could be provided to consumers for reference with the simple agreement. They'll be housed online in a place where consumers can readily access them. And for consumers who don't have internet access, the definitions could be available from their issuer in printed form. By doing this, we can create a plain language document that does a much better job at explaining to consumers how the credit card actually works, what it costs, in what circumstances, how and when those costs can change, what to do if there's an error on the account. Here's an example of our approach. The word card, C-A-R-D. As a practical matter, we all know what it means to use a card. But the issuer, for legal reasons, wants to make sure that card is given a long legal definition to cover absolutely everything that the card could be. The card itself, the use of the account without the card, like when you buy something online, the use of checks written on the account, and so on. We create a definition of card that covers all these bases, but moves the definitions off the agreement. If you remove all the terms in a contract that can be treated in this way, you can provide real-life customers with a much shorter document that is far more understandable. Our approach is flexible. It's flexible enough to work for almost any kind of credit card product. We simply supply a definitional framework for issuers to use if they want to. This approach will not in any way limit the ability of issuers to compete on price or on rewards or on other features. Quite the contrary. Our approach enhances issuers' ability to compete by enabling customers to focus on the terms that actually matter. Those are the ones that are likely to differ from product to product, and therefore to inform consumer choices. Our hope is that this thought starter will be a resource for credit card companies, and we look forward to improving it with feedback from the industry and from the public. And just like credit card companies routinely test new products dozens, hundreds, even thousands of times, we look forward to testing this prototype. We realize that there's a lot more science than art in developing clear, easy-to-understand credit card agreements, and we plan to put our idea through rigorous tests to make sure it's as effective as possible. We think that banks and credit unions and other issuers are going to like our prototype. Pentagon Federal Credit Union, one of the largest credit unions in the country, with 1 million members and more than 350,000 cardholders, has already signed up to test the idea. We plan to work with Pentagon Federal and whoever else wants to join us to make a simplified, shortened agreement an industry reality. Now, we are ambitious at the Bureau, but we are not naive. Changing the status quo will take a lot of time and effort and incremental steps. What we're looking for initially with this prototype is to provide consumers the chance to understand their contract. Given where we are currently, that would be a huge step forward. As part of this initiative, today we're also releasing a database of credit card agreements. It's a good resource to see how your credit card contract or prospective credit card contract compares to others. You can also compare yours to our prototype. Go to consumerfinance.gov, which is our website, to find out more. Now, before I conclude, I just want to reiterate that the CFPB believes in creating a market that's fair, that's transparent and competitive. A market that works for everyone, consumers and lenders alike. Our simplified credit card agreement is a great example of how the Bureau can work with industry, consumer groups, and consumers themselves in order to achieve these goals. As we were working on this idea, one of the members of our team reminded me of a quote by Albert Einstein. And Einstein once said, "If you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough." I think our work on this prototype is a great example of how it's possible to take something complicated and bring it up a level. Not bring it down a level, but bring it up a level to a place where more people have a chance of understanding it. And in developing this prototype, one key lesson we've learned is that distilling a complicated financial contract is not easy, but we think the effort was worth it, and that the prototype is an enormous step. Now we hope that credit card issuers, consumers, and other stakeholders will join in and help us make it even better. Thank you for your time.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Frank Pollock. Since 1999, Frank has served as president and CEO, as you just heard, of the Pentagon Federal Credit Union, a credit union for the Army, the Air Force, Coast Guard, Homeland Security, military, government, and related groups and institutions. During Frank's tenure as president and CEO, membership in the credit union has grown from 400,000 to nearly 1.1 million member customers, and their assets have grown from $3.6 billion to $15 billion. Also under his leadership, the credit union established a foundation to provide payday lending alternatives, grants for first-time home buyers, and emergency assistance to wounded veterans. Thank you, Frank, for joining us today. Frank Pollock.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and it's my pleasure to be here today. And I really would like to keep my comments brief, but I'd like to talk about the CFPB for just a minute. Those of you who haven't met folks here from the CFPB, I would encourage you to do that today, because they are unlike maybe any other government agency I've experienced, in that they have a real passion for what they're doing. They are very much akin to the people that we serve. The people we serve in America are the people that enable you to be here today and talk about anything you want to talk about in any way you want to talk about it. They are the people who defend our country. And so I have been asked by others why we are participating in this program. We're participating in this program because it's good for our military service members. It happens to also be good for our credit union, but our credit union is owned by our members, and so everything that we do is about what is good for our members. And there are a number of credit union people in the audience here today, and you should talk to them too, because we think that the credit union model actually represents the model for the way financial services should be provided to Americans, and that speaks to the smallest of the credit unions here as well as the largest of the credit unions. It is rare, in my experience, and I am an old man, it is rare to find a government form that is better than private industry. But when the folks from CFPB came and presented us with this disclosure, and I would tell you that we have had plain English disclosures for almost 20 years, this form blows away what we currently provide in terms of its ease of use and the ability of somebody to understand what's actually written on it. And so while I recognize that it will take time for the Society of Financial Institutions to adopt change, because change is hard for anybody, for us, this was one of the easiest and simplest things we could possibly agree to do, and I mean that sincerely, because it will enable a military person to understand exactly what they're buying before they ever buy it. In fact, the context of our discussion had to do with disclosures on the back end. I really envision us being able to use this form on the front end so that a member can then take our rates and terms and compare them to somebody else's rates and terms and make a judgment decision on their own for what is best for them. And I think that's important because in America we do a terrible job of financial education. Our children grow up, turn 18, and we see this in the military all the time, and we were talking about this earlier, go out and buy a car that costs too much money, take insurance on that car that costs too much money because an 18-year-old boy pays a lot of money for insurance, and they're in trouble financially right from the start. And you can pretty much ask anybody in the military about this story. It is absolutely true. We don't educate our children in junior high and high school sufficiently so that when they come of age, they know what they're doing financially. These disclosures go beyond simply being a disclosure. In my view, they form the foundation for our society beginning to do a better job of educating our citizenry on how to handle money. And there probably is no more lasting event that could take place in America right now than that. If we left behind a generation of Americans who were actually financially literate, probably it'd be the most significant thing we've done in America in quite some time. So everybody here has said thank you to us for participating. We're actually honored to be here. We think it's amazing that a governmental agency is actually asking people to participate up front and help to create the forms of the future and the disclosures of the future, and that is very unique. And it speaks to the professionalism and the quality of the people at CFPB. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much.
We have time for 2 questions. Cheryl, you want to go first?
Oh, okay. I guess the Pew Safe Credit Card Project said that after the CARD Act went into effect, credit issuers sent about 10 million applications for business cards, which don't fall under the Card Act. And I just wondered if that's something that the Bureau is looking at, if this form would be also applied to business cards, and if you could just address that.
Well, as you know, in general, the jurisdiction of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is really focused on consumers, and so commercial transactions in general are not within our point of view. But I will say that responsible providers of credit across the board are very interested in their customers knowing what they're getting into. So although technically speaking, exactly the same thing might not be as relevant, the point of the matter is that if one embraces the notion of providing good information in a clear way to customers, no matter who they are, the same kind of principles, I think, will play through.
All right, and with that, thank you for coming, and we are concluding this press availability.
Thank you.